The reading that you just heard, it may seem rather odd that that's our reading, but when you combine it with what we're going to talk about in Ruth today, you're going to see how God really does have a big plan for all of us, and seeing how we fit into it is a beautiful thing. During education hour, I was really blessed by my time with the confirmation parents today. I was thinking about that. We got a chance to just sit down and talk about challenges of being a parent and the challenges of raising kids and some of the ordinary stuff that goes on. And it just got me thinking about how so often, you walk up to somebody in the hallway and you just say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And they say, "Good," and then that's it, and it's like, And today, a lot of people, have come up to Pastor Miles and myself and said, "Congratulations on Ironman," that kind of stuff, which, praise God, it went well last week and everything. It's a big thing, but it's interesting how, we're always thinking about the big things we do in life, the next big thing. And, when you say, "How are you doing?" a lot of times that might even be the conversation of choice, the trip you went on, or the big thing you got going on. But the things that I've found have the biggest impact, and I've been thinking about it a lot this week, the things that have the biggest impact on our life are the ordinary, regular old stuff that happens every single day. And it's through the regular, everyday stuff that I'm going to help you see that God can turn some of this ordinary stuff that you may not realize why you're doing all the time, and He can actually do extraordinary things through it. And when you see that, it's a beautiful thing. I came across a blog this past week that a pastor wrote that really kind of hit home for me. He wrote about a confirmation student that he had. He said it was the tallest acolyte they'd ever had at their church. And him and his family were members. And when this young man got through high school, he ended up being a very gifted basketball player. And he ended up getting a scholarship to play at a good school. He didn't say in the blog what the name of the student was or what school he went to, but he did say it was a big enough deal that they actually had a little mini press conference when he signed to go to that school. And the young man had a chance to say thank you to the people who helped him get there. And when he got to talking about his parents and thanking them, what do you think the things he thanked them for? What do you think he thanked his parents for? I mean, you really think about it. If your kid was in that place, or if you have a child, or if somebody close in your life had the opportunity to thank you for something, what would it be? This young man first thanked his mom for all the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that she made for him growing up, and he thanked his dad for shooting hoops with him in the driveway and rebounding for him. Not for all those fancy trips, not for all the big stuff we spent money on, not for that huge basketball camp you sent me to. No, he thanked his parents for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and rebounds. And it just drives that point home all the more that there's huge impact in the ordinary. He appreciated his mother's presence and regular, everyday love that she showed for him and care, and his father taking time to just be with his son. Those are the things that really made a difference for him. And the pastor went on to say that just kind of affirmed his own worldview as a parent, because he's always said that parenting is 1% Disney World, 1% tragedy, which is ultimately always going to happen at some point or another, and 98% ordinary stuff. And when he started to see things that way, you start to take great care and see great value in the regular, everyday stuff that you do. I found myself thinking about this, especially when I reflected back on my own Ironman journey, and I know, for me, talking to Pastor Miletz about this, we both could share similar stories. What I'm going to talk about just for a second. I know many of you heard about this a lot, and I'm not looking to beat it into the ground. But it very much fits into what we hear in Ruth today, because one of the common questions people ask me, especially now that we're done, is, "I don't know how you did that." And I'll tell you, when I was back in January, I'll tell you, I don't know if I'm going to do it either, because I still remember Pastor Miles coming up here and talking about, "Oh yeah, I'm the fast guy and the skinny one. I'm totally going to finish it." I'm like, "Dude, you're setting me up for failure here, right?" When I'm like dropping in the marathon, last part of this Ironman thing. But how was it that we were both able to finish an Ironman? Well, honestly, it goes back to what we did in the ordinary, everyday things of life. We made some changes. We had to have some discipline. And if I went all the way back to January, that was the first time I got in a swimming pool. It had been the first time in a long time, several years. I did about 20 lengths in the pool, swallowed a gallon of water, got out, absolutely exhausted, and then I'm like, I wonder how far 2.4 miles are. So I asked the person who's in charge of the pool there, I asked them, and they're like, they couldn't even tell me, because they don't regularly have people swimming 2.4 miles in the pool there for some reason. I don't know why not. And it came up to, so we had to think about it, calculate it, and it came up to like 170 lengths, and I'm like, And so, but what I did, and this is, and like I said, Pastor Miles, at the times where he had to make adjustments as well too, I had to create a new ordinary. And so I started saying, okay, twice a week at noon, I'm going to go swim, and we're just going to see where this takes me. And little bit by little bit, my body got stronger, and then something else happened. In May, I found out that when I got off my bike after riding for just like 25 miles, I could barely run. I was like my legs were like dead weight. So I realized once again I needed to change my ordinary with the big picture in mind, where we were headed. Okay, so on my Fridays when I would do my long rides, I would make sure that when I got done riding like for 3-4 hours or whatever, I'd get off and I'd run for 45 minutes, and it made a huge difference. And it wasn't just me changing the ordinary in my routine, it was my family supporting me and loving me in the ordinary and being patient with me, because there were times too where I began to see how important the little things that I would do in my life were. Like, for example, we have family movie night, and I would find that I was absolutely exhausted. I don't think I stayed awake for an entire family movie night movie. Like, I was always falling asleep, and I could see that my kids would notice, and it would actually have an impact on my family, my energy level being low. And when you're talking about spending, big, huge chunk of your day during the summer, on a Friday, or even during the year when kids are in school, it takes away from the honey-do list. And I'm not getting some things done around the house, little things. I used to be like, I'll take care of this, and I'll do this. But those little things, they add up. And so I guess what I'm saying is I found that, when I crossed the finish line this last week, I gained a great appreciation, not just it was a cool event, but for all the ordinary stuff leading up to it, all the wonderful support that I received, all the ordinary congratulations type of stuff afterwards, and all that kind of stuff just got me thinking about what would happen now that I got all this time back. Because suddenly now it feels like, I used to think I didn't have any time, now I feel like I got tons, It's like, what if I started intentionally utilizing my time to be the best parent, to be the best husband in the ordinary every day, What would it look like? And I want to ask you the question. Think about what does your ordinary look like? Get that question up there. What does your ordinary look like? If I asked each of you, and this was interesting for me in that confirmation class, was just listening to what everybody's ordinary was. I know that if I asked some of you would say, my ordinary is boring. I'm so tired of the ordinary. All I do is the same thing every day, and I just want something exciting, which is why the trips and that kind of stuff is the thing that tends to be on the mind if you're in that stage. Or maybe if I asked you, and I've heard this before, if I asked you how things are going, you may say, life is absolutely chaotic. I'm fighting with my spouse all the time. We're all on different pages. We're all doing different things. Nobody has time for anybody. It's chaos. It's life is crazy. Or maybe you're going from job to job, and it's hard. Your circumstances make life feel like chaos, and all you want is out. Or maybe your ordinary is exhausting. And all the demands and all the things that you're doing, you feel like you're chicken running around with your head cut off. You're just doing, and you find yourself resenting the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Maybe that's where you find yourself. Or maybe if I asked you what does your ordinary look like, you might say, I'm doing just pretty good. Regardless of where you find yourself right now, I want you to consider how sin is at work in your life. Because no matter how you respond to that question, we all have that disease. And sin is a disease like any old disease that has symptoms, many different symptoms. But the one symptom we always all share because of sin is self-centeredness. It turns us in on ourselves. It curves us in on ourselves. And who becomes the center of the universe? So, in the ordinary, in the everyday stuff that we do, who stands at the center of it all? Me, you see? And so what kind of attitude do we begin to have about the regular stuff that we do? It's a chore. It's something that, and so you begin to fight for yourself in the ordinary. And when it says in the Bible, all we like sheep have gone astray, I mean, you see this in our everyday lives. You see this, you can see this when you see like somebody who's at home, they can't, because of their health condition, they can't get out, and you have the caretaker, just like beginning to lament that I can never, that I feel bad because I'm caring for this person, but I never can't get out of this. And then the person who's dealing with that can't change their situation. Or you have a family situation where you have the teenager up in their room by themselves doing whatever, while mom and dad are downstairs, each on their own electronic devices, kind of doing their own thing, while brother and sister's down playing with Barbies. It's all these different things going on. There's no connectedness, and who stands at the center of it? I do. And what sin leads to is us never being satisfied or content with the ordinary, and us never utilizing it and seeing it as something that God can work in and through to do powerful, extraordinary things. And this leads us to a question, though. Where is God in all of this? Okay? It's a good question to ask. Where is God in all of this? Because it can be very hard to see God in the ordinary stuff, isn't it? One of the common things that I hear from people when we're looking for God in the regular, everyday, is we're looking for like miracles. We're looking for extraordinary. So when like suddenly that job opens up that I've been looking for forever, and I can get that job and things can get better in my life, or I get more money, that's totally a God thing. And I'm not denying that it is, okay? But that's where we look for it. We read the Bible and we hear about the parting of the seas, the dead being raised, fish and loaves being multiplied, and so that's the kind of stuff we look for in our lives. So like we look for the crazy circumstance where you run into the friends of a brother, of a whoever, that just happened to know so-and-so, and then you get a connection and something great happens. That's the kind of stuff they're always looking for. But because we're so busy looking for that stuff, which certainly can be a God thing, we miss how God is already at work. Okay? And we forget that God does his best work. And as you see this, when you open up the Bible and you actually read it, you find out that he does his best work in the ordinary, caring for us right now in the present, preparing us for the future, setting our eyes on the goal, where we're headed. And you could think kind of like that Iron Man thing. This brings us to Ruth. God working in the ordinary in the book of Ruth. And as Pastor Miles shared, we showed you that video because you got to read the entire book of Ruth to really kind of get the overarching story and understanding what's going on there. Couldn't just pick it apart. And so what you have in Ruth is an example of God working in very ordinary circumstances to do incredible things. And you see God's hand on this particular situation in Ruth, and you actually see him reaching through that situation all the way to us today. So just a recap, you saw this in the video. Naomi was a woman who was married. She had 2 sons. Her husband decided to move them from their homeland to a foreign land because they had a famine. They had to care for their family. So they moved. And while they're in this foreign land, Naomi's 2 sons, they got married to women. One was named Orpah. The other one was named Ruth. Now while they're in this foreign land, okay, away from family, friends, okay, foreign land, Naomi's husband dies. And then her 2 sons die. And now it's just Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, all by themselves. And in those days, that's scary because property, family identity, it all went through the male line. And so Naomi was like dead weight. And she actually looks at Orpah and Ruth and she says, go back to your homeland, find a husband, and take care of yourself. And actually, that's what Orpah does. She goes back. And this is the part where we look at the story and we're expecting kind of like a Moses or some like fire coming from heaven, seas parting, God taking his, like smacking something, open the door, whatever, something crazy happening. That's what we expect, right? I mean, but that's not what we see. Instead, what we see is God working in a way that it's beautiful when we see this in our own lives. You see God working through Ruth in vocation. Vocation is a word which means calling. And Ruth recognizes that she's been called to care for Naomi. It's like a husband. How's a husband know he's been called to care for his wife? Because she's right there. And you're her husband. You know that God's called you to care for her. And in the same situation here, you have Ruth. Naomi's right there. She needs her. And so what does Ruth say? Ruth looks at Naomi and she says, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wow. That's Ruth living and loving her neighbor and doing exactly what God designed her to do. And God is working through her. Vocation is oftentimes described as us wearing the masks of God. And the idea behind it is whether you're the garbage collector or a CEO in a company or a husband or a wife or a brother or sister, it's in those callings in life, God is working to bless and care for other people in the present. And it's a beautiful thing. So there's God at work caring for Naomi through Ruth. And then the story continues, and then they run into a guy named Boaz who sees Naomi and Ruth. They need help. They're on their own. And Boaz has nothing to gain from this. He has nothing to gain from helping them out. But what he does is he ends up marrying Ruth, okay, so that Naomi's family line can continue. He seeks to bless them. And once again, God working in vocation, in the ordinary, everyday stuff. People doing what they were called to do, God at work. But you see, God's hand was on all of this, all along. Okay, so you might say, well, that's kind of ordinary stuff. Okay, that's great. That stuff happened. But God's hand was guiding this to something even greater that blesses us today, because we find out that Ruth and Boaz had a child that had another child, and you go on. Ruth was the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of who? Of Jesus. And we see in Jesus God at work in the ordinary again. Jesus was the Son of God, and there are many extraordinary things about him, but he was also very ordinary. Where was Jesus born? He was born in a stable. Wow, that's exciting. What did Jesus' life look like? Was he busy, talking to kings and hanging out with important people with lots of money? And Jesus hung out with fishermen. Yes, he blessed people by doing miracles, but his ultimate blessing was in preaching the truth, the good news that God was present. And ultimately, Jesus came to bless all of us by doing something extraordinary, but at the same time very ordinary. Giving his life on a cross, dying in a lowly, despicable, ugly fashion. That's how God blesses us and comes to us and reminds us that even when we fail in our callings in life, and even when the ordinary is threatening to swallow us up, that's how God comes to each and every one of us, picks us up, forgives us, and points us forward to try again. Tomorrow's a new day. That's the gift of Jesus. That's the gift of grace. And you see what happens then is that God actually has a plan for our ordinary. We recognize that today, God is still at work. And you're like, so how does this work in my everyday life, my everyday existence? Well, if you looked at me and you said, Pastor, I feel like my ordinary is boring, or I feel like my ordinary is chaotic, or I feel like my ordinary is exhausting, or I feel like my ordinary, it's not too bad. My response to every situation would be, is Jesus. Is Jesus at the center of your ordinary? Because he's the only one who will help you to see that ordinary stuff, all that other stuff, as the good work God has called you to do. And he's the only one that, if things are chaotic and all over the place, that can help you reorder it according to God's will rather than my own or your own. There's a reason why the first commandment is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. There's a reason for that. Because when we worship anything other than God, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And if we're living our life just to make a lot of money and to do the next big thing or whatever, we're not thinking big enough. Because at the end of the day, there's only one Savior, and that's Jesus. And that's why God gave us the 10 Commandments, to remind us of how we were designed to live in relationship with God. So not just knowing what he did for me, but having an active relationship, listening to him, living with Jesus in the ordinary. And this was something that just struck me like a lightning bolt last night. I was sitting here in the sanctuary. I had somebody that came to Genesis a little early. And he asked me if I would give him communion. And he's a member of our church, and he he has a hard time getting around, and so I just kind of sat with him in here, and the room was empty. There's nobody here. I was sitting right over there, looking over here, and there's all, there's a couple lights on. It's quiet. You could hear a pin drop, echo. It's kind of cool, actually. And we got talking about this space and how, this room, it's a fancy room. But in many ways, it has walls, a ceiling. It's not, in that sense, it's not different than other rooms. How is this place that I'm standing a lot different from that space? I could say I'm sitting on grass, but what makes this place special? And I said, it's really the ordinary, regular, everyday stuff that happens here. I was thinking about that. What happens here every week? Sinners come in on ordinary days. See, we're always striving for that huge, big thing, but what happens? Sinners come in here on ordinary days, hear God's ordinary word, to receive his ordinary gift of grace that does incredible things. Ordinary people come here. Children have water poured on their head in baptism, and they're ordinary water. And through the water and the word, they're made part of God's family. And you can look at that child and you can say, no matter what happens in your life, God looks at you and says, you're my child. That's incredible. But that happens through some very ordinary things. It's one very ordinary thing. Holy Communion, God's forgiveness, God's love, something that we hear, but to actually taste it and see and know the Lord is good. Taste his forgiveness. That's what happens in communion. It's a beautiful thing. It's an amazing thing. And the more and more that we rest in that ordinary, the more and more God prepares us. Because you see, he has a plan for our ordinary that goes beyond these walls. He calls us to go home, and he calls us to care for one another and remind one another that the center of our ordinary is Jesus. And when things get off, we're called to forgive one another, love one another, point one another to the cross, seek to rearrange things, do things better, but at the end of the day, recognizing that our greatest good is Jesus. And in the meantime, yes, also seek to do things like make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, change diapers, rebound, sit for a moment and listen, help somebody up, help someone get through the door, whatever it is. God works through those ordinary things. And it's in those ordinary things that God shapes us and molds us, and he ultimately prepares us. I've been here for a little over 5 years now. Time flies. And there's some stories that exist within a community that pop up quite regularly. And it's always interesting for me because it tells me what things kind of resonate with people and really stick with them. And this was before I came here, and somebody brought it up this past week, which is why I'm bringing it up again now. But before I came here, there was an accident down the road, some youth, and for very good reasons. A lot of them were shooken up. The people that were involved, parents, people were shooken up. And Pastor Miles went out there, and I've had people quote him repeatedly based on what he said. He said, all those ordinary things, he said to these kids, all those ordinary things that you do, like you've been going to church and all that kind of stuff, that you didn't quite understand why you were doing that before. Well, all that stuff, hearing about Jesus, all that was preparing you for today, preparing you for this. And you know why that resonated and why it continues to come up and why I continue to hear it? Because it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Deep down inside, we all know that the ordinary, regular, everyday stuff that we do, it matters more than anything else. And prioritizing our relationship with God and fighting through those days when we maybe don't feel like it, or I have better things to do, all that kind of stuff, and doing it for not just for ourselves, but for our children, and encouraging other people to do it, it's worth it because it has a bigger impact than anything else that we can come across. Jesus prepares you, he prepares me for whatever that thing might be. So, brothers and sisters in Christ, here we are today, this ordinary day, this ordinary worship service, hearing God's ordinary word. You know what's happening? Jesus is giving you his wisdom, giving you some perspective, reminding you how much you need him. How much your kids need him. And you know what? When whatever it is that's going to be your thing comes, by God's grace and because of this ordinary, God's going to do something extraordinary, and he will have you ready because Jesus will be by your side. Amen.